Linx allows for the easy creation of fully customizable and robust APIs. This can be done by using the REST plugin. The REST plugin allows you to call REST endpoints, but it also allows for the creation of REST APIs via two different ways. You can either use the REST host service, which will allow you to import a pre-created OpenAPI 3 specification to create your API, or you can use the simple REST host service, which will allow you to create your API by using a wizard. To start, let's take a look at the simple REST host. The simple REST host has a number of properties for you to set. Among these are the base URI. This is the URI where your API will be hosted. For security, you have two options to choose from, API key or HTTP bearer. Operations are essentially endpoints. Here, you can specify the endpoints of your API. You can add as many operations as you need. Each operation will need a name as well as a path. You can select the method of your operation, and there are multiple to choose from, such as get, put, post, delete, and many more. You can also set header parameters as well as query string parameters. Multiple parameters can be set here. You also have full control over the request body as well as the response body. As an example, you could return a list of JSON objects if you needed to. For example, I'm setting my response body to be a list of products. You can also choose whether or not the security scheme should be applied on this specific operation. Once you save your operations, you'll notice that they have been created as event handlers underneath your simple REST host service. This is where you will build your functionality. There are also many other properties to set, such as the maximum connections, maximum request size, API documentation, of which there are two. You can either choose to have your API documented in Redocly or via Swagger UI. You can also show additional events such as the authenticate event, before operation or after operation, which is useful in certain cases. Now that our getProducts operation has been created, it's time for us to populate the functionality that will execute inside of this operation. For this operation, we're going to retrieve all products in a database. To do this, I'm going to create a new function. This function we're going to call getProducts, and we're going to return a list of products. This is what the product type that we're going to return looks like. Inside of getProducts, I'm going to create a list that's going to be a list of products. We're then going to use the execute SQL component to connect to a database and pull all of the products inside of this database table. I'll be using Linx to generate my select query. Next, we simply need to add each product into the product list. To do this, I'm going to use an add to list component, and then I'm going to simply map my fields. Now that we've created a list of products, we can simply return that list as the result of this specific function. We can now simply call this function in our getProducts operation. Because the result of our function is what we require in our response body, we can simply return the result of that function as the result body. And that's it, we've created our API with our getProducts endpoint. Now we can debug it to see how it will run. Debugging the simple REST host will create a locally hosted version of the API that we can test on our local. We can see here that the Swagger documentation is available for us to use. I'm going to use it so that we can test our API. When executing the endpoint, we see our data as a result. The simple REST host is a fantastic option when you need to quickly create an API to host data, but it's not the only option in Linx. In Linx, you can also use the REST host, where you have much more control over your API. Here, you'll see similar properties with one exception, the API definition. You need to specify your API via OpenAPI 3 specification. Upon saving, your endpoints will be created as operations again. We need to configure all of the properties as with the simple REST host. What is important to note is because you now have access to the API definition, you have much more control over how the API will behave. We need to add a functionality in our operation again. I'm going to use the same function that we created to return the list of products. I'm also going to return in the response to 100 the list of products that we generate in that function. And now we're ready to test our API again. We can debug the REST host to create a locally hosted version of our API. I can open the Swagger documentation and test the API once more. I chose to host the Swagger documentation again to make testing simpler. Once we're ready, we can deploy our solution to a Linx server by using the deploy button. Once deployed, the API will be hosted on a Linx server, meaning you don't have to worry about hosting. And that's how you can easily create REST APIs using Linx.